Right, hello everyone. Welcome to the latest Hull Noir series of short author interviews with authors that we like. My name is Nick Quantrill. I'm one of the festival's co-directors and author of the Joe Geraghty series. And our guest today is Elliot Sweeney. His debut novel, The Next to Die, which I have a copy of there, is, in his own words, a crime novel about redemption that fuses his love of pacey, hard-boiled fiction with a 20-year career in mental health. In 2018, Elliot was awarded the H.W. Fisher Scholarship to attend the Curtis Brown Creative Novel Writing course and Hachette's Future Bookshelf scheme. He's also written for the Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine and Switchblade, amongst many others. So, welcome, Elliot. And The Next to Die. Was it a long road to get to this point, then to get a novel published? If you initially started writing those short stories, or was it something that was kind of on the boil from the start? Do you think?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, thanks for having me, Nick. By the way, it was kind of marinating for quite a while, but writing a novel is quite an endurance feat, isn't it? So compared to a short story where you can afford to make some mistakes, but a book is a big commitment. But it was brewing away, and I really wanted to attempt a private investigator novel, contemporary, set in London, where I'm from. But I was struggling to find an idea that felt original enough to pursue in a novel format. Yeah.
Yeah, so the novel introduces us to Dylan Casper, who we say is a small-time private investigator and a part-time barber as well, isn't he? So tell us a little bit about Dylan. Where did he come from? How did he manage to develop in? Because he is quite an interesting and different character to what you normally see, I think, in crime fiction.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to the hard-boiled tradition of PI writing, to my mind, is that there are certain kind of tropes, and I wanted to stick to those in a sense, where the protagonist is often a kind of a mercurial figure, an ex-policeman, which he is, likes a bit too much to drink, is flawed with a temper, has a mean streak, but is not mean, as Chandler put it. So I wanted to stick to those rules, but I also wanted to inject some kind of current ideas which were affecting me in my day job. I'm a psychiatric nurse, and at that time, there's been one or two quite sort of sad deaths in my work, suicides, and I thought, what if his life was directly affected by suicide, and that could be kind of his impetus, I suppose. So it was really a fusion of real and imaginary that kind of gave me the spark for this novel. And I thought, well, what if his quest could be one of redemption, but it's not about solving a murder. It's about trying to get to the bottom of why somebody completed a suicide, and in doing so, there's some redemption of his own loss, which we discover more about in the book. Yeah.
Did he come out kind of fully formed to you almost in that sense, or did the short stories kind of help shape him in some way? Did he maybe appear as a prototype character for you first?
Sure. That's a great question, actually. I thought short stories really helped me, because I wrote a few novelettes and short stories with this character just to try out the voice, because for me, voice is the thing that I remember most from a book. I tend to forget plots quite quickly, actually, but if the central character, the protagonist, is memorable, then I will go back to that book. And so I really wanted to have him quite well defined. He's quite blunt, quite droll. There is sort of dark humor, and I wanted to try and really get that fine-tuned before embarking on the book. I mean, Robert B. Parker spoke a lot about the sound of his books. He was asked once, why do people like your books? He said, I think people like the way they sound. And for me, that sound, the swing of the prose, was as important as the actual, the nuts and bolts of the plot. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that kind of Elmore Leonard thing, isn't it? I think dialogue into it, and that rhythm of language, where not a lot seems to happen sometimes, but it's that kind of interaction into it between the environment and the character that Elmore Leonard and Robert Parker are superb at. Yeah. And so, in terms of the plot for Next to Die, he's asked to kind of look after a troubled young man to a guy called Tommy. That's kind of the start of the novel, really. So, I guess why can't he say no? Because is it that kind of code of honor that's central to his character that means he kind of has to take on these jobs? There's something kind of decent about him. Is that kind of fair to
Yeah,
say? I think?
yeah, no, that's right. He's a force for good, more or less. He's flawed. He's lost. He's been out of work for 5 years. He walked out of the police force after the untimely death of his daughter, and then a troubled young man enters his life by chance, it would seem, and he's driven to try and do some good. And as the novel progresses, we find out why he's driven to do some good. What is his need for redemption? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we're giving anything away in terms of plot spoiler, but Tommy commits suicide, doesn't he? You know, this is kind of the heart of the novel, isn't it? And it's kind of makes it a tough read because it taps into Dylan's past as well, you say, with his daughter having committed suicide. Is that kind of the heart of the book, or the heart of Dylan, maybe more than the heart of the book? Is that this is kind of what dragged Dylan as a character, isn't it? Is that kind of the central point of him as a character? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bleak topic, but it's a very prescient topic, and this whole idea of kind of mental health, particularly men's mental health, is something that interests me a great deal. You know, this choice to live, this decision to actually live through pain. You know, so the book touches on themes of suicide and deliberate self-harm and abuse and trauma, with quite heavy stuff, but stuff which I've worked around for many years, and I did want to try and explore those because, you know, it's not a cozy crime, definitely not. It's quite a sharp crime, but I've been told that it does speak with some authenticity, which is fantastic. Yeah.
So I guess authenticity is the important point, isn't it? Really, that sense of your expertise and experience that you bring to the book. Is it more about that than it is about, I guess, more than research, isn't it? Because for a writer like myself, I couldn't write about those subjects with that same knowledge and understanding. I think so. Is that I guess was that the important part of writing the novel for you? Is about those experiences that you've had in the workplace and bringing it into a fictional setting?
Yeah, it's a good. I did mull over this quite a lot. I guess particularly for suicide, you know, it's a very emotive subject, and most people have actually been affected by suicide in one way or another. I've found, not necessarily directly through a loved one, but they know somebody who is. And it's a subject that isn't going away. You know, it's one of the biggest causes of death amongst certain age groups, particularly in men. And I did want to show that it's not always neat and tidy. You know, suicides, as they're portrayed sometimes in films, particularly, you know, the person who completes the suicide will write a letter, and then they'll kind of tie a noose, and it'll be quite precise and quite clean. In reality, you know, I find suicides are quite messy, you know, and sometimes they're unclear why someone's done it. It's not even necessarily clear that it is a suicide. It's a death that could have been a suicide or not. And I wanted to try and get a sense of the mess and the carnage that is left after a suicide. So one of the kind of characters who's introduced is the driver of a train who impacts with the suicide victim, because I've never in books or films seen actually kind of, you know, the people around a suicide being introduced and the impact that it has on them, because it must be incredibly traumatic being, you know, the driver of a vehicle that, you know, collides with somebody who's taken their life. And that interested me, actually.
Yeah. So was there an element of research in that, within that sort of strand of the book, then you think, or was it kind of just drawn from that professional environment that you find yourself working in?
I've never met any train drivers. I've met people who with post-traumatic stress who have witnessed people taking their lives and describing it, and the kind of the nightmares and the flashbacks they have. And I've sort of, you know, I've said I know that it's real, because it's a, you know, I can't think of many things that are more unnatural than seeing somebody take their life. It must be horrific.
Yeah, and so I think for all that it is, that there is that darkness to the novel, and that is handled very sensitively. You know, it's kind of done in a really kind of careful, I think, and considered way. The novel does have some lighter moments as well, doesn't it? Like you said, the humour of the characters. But in particular, I really like, you know, the fact we've got a great protagonist in the story in Dylan. You need a great antagonist as well, don't you? And he's kind of comes rubbing up against a guy called Mick Napier, the Irish kind of gangster with a grip on a corner of London, and he's very loud and he's very brash. Was that kind of a deliberate attempt to kind of inject some light into the story? Because he's almost kind of cartoonish sounds, sounds wrong, but he's kind of very, very much of a lighter character, isn't he? And he's a bad guy who needs taken down without doubt.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I wanted to have him sinister, but also quite sort of pathetic. I had in mind like a kind of Graham Norton character on amphetamine. Really loud and in your face, but unpleasant as well, and yeah, and quite psychopathic as well. But I hope I've not portrayed the novel as just being some bleak. There is elements of humour in here, which dark humour perhaps, but that's so important, the light and the shade. Yeah, and some of the minor characters, like his landlady is this retired psychiatrist, very sort of acerbic woman, who acts as a sort of kind of conscience mentor archetype, I suppose, and points out sort of the logical things that Casper should do, which he often elects to not take her advice, and that leads to all kinds of problems. But that provides some humour as well. Yeah.
Yeah, not very much so. I think I think there's a lot of that kind of likeness in the book, and it kind of contrasts really nicely and works. Were those characters did they come to you quite naturally as you was writing it, or were they kind of ones that you kind of planned in advance almost? Was it was it? Are you a plotter by nature as a writer, or was the book kind of written by the seat of your pants in a sense?
It was it was a bit too pantsy for my liking with hindsight. I think that's probably why it took a bit longer to write than it needed to. And I didn't know half the things that I've learned now about plotting and kind of the beats of a plot, how you can rely on those. So I just did follow my intuition, and it kind of worked. But then I cut things up a bit, and I moved chapter 3 to chapter 1. So you start with the death, and I was like, oh, that makes it a lot more impactful, and that helped. But I tend to feel when characters are talking, I tend to just follow my gut instinct and see where it goes. I find certainly for dialogue, I don't want to be too prescriptive, otherwise it can sound a bit fake. I knew how I wanted it to end. I had an ending in sight. One of the good things about writing from the first person perspective, which this book is, it restricts you in a way, so you can only see the world through one person's set of eyes. Which has its problems as well, because for plot, to reveal information can be quite challenging sometimes if it's just through one voice. But for me, especially for this first book, it was quite helpful, because it meant I had to sort of really think about how information can be sort of drip fed through the book through this one set of eyes. Yeah.
Yeah, was it always going to be a first person book with it being a private investigator?
Yeah, yeah, that definitely. Again, that's in the the Philip Marlowe, they're all first person narratives. I wanted to stick with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of those kind of periphery characters that we spoke about, did they take a little bit of work to get them fully formed on the page? Because I guess with it being a first person novel, when you're writing through the eyes of Dylan as the private investigator, the temptation must be, just as you say, to focus on what he's seeing and how he kind of understands the world around him, and how you kind of feed that to the reader, the clues and such like. But so those characters like Mick and his landlady are so kind of lively and jump off the page. Did that take a little bit of work, do you think, or was it?
I probably shouldn't say this, but a lot of them are sort of based on people I've met along the way, and I've just to sort of ramp them up a bit and make them a bit more caricatures of the people they already are. I would say though, for the character of Tommy, it was interesting when I first wrote the book. Tommy was a female character, and his sister was a male, and then I shared the book with a kind of a writer I really admire, and he said publishers are sick of sort of a book opening with a dead girl. It's such a stereotype now in a crime book, and my book began with a dead girl. And I thought, well, and that's annoying. What if I tried to subvert it then? What if I gave him a sex change and gave his creepy brother a sex change? And then what if I made sort of Tommy immersed in this kind of sinister sort of gay underworld, and really just went to town with that and had some fun? And suddenly the book grew legs. It really sort of came to life, and it allowed me to just sort of explore you know, my 20s sort of spent knocking around East London and just having fun and drinking too much, and you know, to really sort of go to town with it, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. You said it's a London set novel, and you're from London originally, aren't you? But you now live in the northwest.
Yes.
How do you make the decision? So why was it a London set novel? Did it have to be London, do you think, or is that kind of distance from London a help as a writer?
Yeah, it does now. I mean, I guess it was almost laziness as well. I wanted it to have an urban heartbeat and to be richly, very diverse. And I'm working on the third book at the moment, and you know, so I like having characters from you know, all different countries and walks of life, and you know, London does give that opportunity. Plus, I know the streets of particularly northeast London where it's set very well, so I can give sort of reference points. Interestingly, though, my this is how sort of subjective writing seems to be from a little experience I have him, and I gave it to my agent, and he was like, "Well, I think you should omit a lot of the street names and the obviously identifiable places, because it can, you know, it'd be more accessible for people in other parts of the country and around the world," which I did, and that took a long time. And then the editor was like, "Well, I'd like it more London centric, so could you put in street names and put in references?" I was like,
It's a game of opinion, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Do you think? I mean, Dylan, it strikes me that it could be quite a portable character, couldn't it? So, do you think you would set the stories elsewhere, or is it always going to be London as a?
No, he's book 3. He's coming up to Blackpool to do some
Excellent.
investigation. Yeah. What's important for me is to I sound a bit mean. He is to make him uncomfortable. You know, I like putting my characters in situations that they are not comfortable around, and to see how they get on, and that's how they learn, and that's how the sort of the story moves on. I find if they're in there, so you know, his natural habitat is kind of a boxing gym. He's kind of quite violent. He likes drinking too much. So these are his habitats. So placing him in kind of affluent areas, or placing him in sort of gay bars, or placing him in kind of very richly multicultural places, or people have different accents even. He's a bit lost, and I find that that's can sort of lead to quite interesting writing, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's quite an unusual book, I think, in the sense that it takes that US hard-boiled style, doesn't it, and blends it with a kind of a British sense of sort of social realism. Was that kind of something that was important to you as a writer as well, to sort of
Yeah,
take those two things and fuse them together?
that definitely was. Yeah, I guess that's just the books I've always read, really. You know, it was Chandler and Elmore Leonard and Edward Baines. You know, these guys are my friends. So I really wanted to fuse that sort of style, the pace, with the world that I see it, you know, through my work, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. So are the British authors as well that may be influencing alongside the Chandlers and such like?
Well, Ted Lewis, who we were talking
Yeah.
about. I reread Carter recently, and I've read Harriet Tice's book recently as well, all three, because we're in the same publishers, and I found her very good, actually, that kind of domestic noir feel. Derek Raymond, do you know him?
Yeah.
I've read his books all again recently, and they're really punchy. And Jake Arnott, who we were discussing, who, you know, isn't necessarily strictly crime, but I particularly found the Long Firm trilogy. I've read those several times now, and they're the pace and just the originality, particularly book 1, where it's following this kind of psychopathic Jewish gangster through several different, very different perspectives. I just thought, what an original idea that was. Yeah.
Yeah, and is there a mix of maybe non-crime influences there as well? Because I think on your website you mentioned Nathan Filer, do you? Which was kind of an author I've heard of, but not particularly aware of his work, but that sense of maybe drawing in from other areas and other traditions is important.
Yeah, Nathan's a psychiatric nurse by background, and he's you know, he's kind of brought mental health topics into the fore, which is interesting. So I do feel some affinity with him, I suppose, and Matt Haig. And I really am interested in kind of some of the post-war American stylists, people like Raymond Carver. I read a lot just for the prose, I think, more than anything. I just find that spare style that's not full of metaphor and simile. I really enjoy that style of writing. Yeah.
And in terms of moving forward with Dylan, in terms of book 2 and book 3, as you mentioned, will mental health be a topic that keeps kind of recurring? You think, is that something that's important to you as a writer, or will that be something completely?
Maybe. Well, I mean, my experience of mental health is so many of the problems that people experience are born from kind of social issues. So I'm very interested in themes of social justice and inequality, and I do try and explore those in my writing. So book 2 is very much about the theme of violence, and not just people fighting, but our this curious interest in sort of almost commodifying violence that we've seen uploading stuff onto YouTube and social media. People sort of, when a fight breaks out in public, people have their phones out, and then they're going to start sharing it. I mean, there was this horrific case of these 2 sisters who were murdered in a park in London, and the police officers who were supposed to be guarding the bodies took photographs of them and shared them. And I thought, where does that sort of interest come from? That's it's more than just violence. It's about wanting to share it. It's sadistic. So, again, it's a bleak topic, but that's something that I'm trying to explore. And book 3, which I'm in the midst of now, he's still immersed in this theme of toxic masculinity, which is quite in at the moment. He's asked to bodyguard somebody who is a campaigner, so he's really having to look at his own toxic masculinity, because he is undoubtedly quite a toxic male. Yeah.
Brilliant. Super. Thank you very much, Elliot. We'll draw a line underneath there. So the next edition is published February 2023. It'll be in the shops for you now. Super. Thank you very much, Elliot. All the best with the book.